Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Doug Brunke, founder and CEO of Global Chamber, and I'm really pleased to introduce three really expert people about business in China. We're going to have a really fun conversation. Normally, we have at least some level of gender balance, so apologies to those that, like me, is sensitive to that. We didn't do a good job of that today, so we'll work on that next time, maybe include this team to bring on some women for our next conversation. You know, China is an amazing place, and it's a great place to do business if you know how, and you know when to go, especially with the coronavirus now that's in China and spreading around the world. It's an extra tricky time, but once this passes, we'll have all sorts of new and fresh opportunities, and we'll largely be focusing in on those. What should your 2020 plan be if you're involved with China? What may be some ideas that you should have going forward? And who better than to speak with these three gentlemen? First of which is Abdelhak Benkerroum. He's the founder and director of Eastheimer Training and Consulting. He's also the author of the book, We Have a Deal. And he's also just a very international fellow with strong understanding of Spanish and living in Shanghai with Chinese and business around the world. He happens to be zooming in from Casablanca, giving a presentation there, potentially isolated there for a bit because going back to China, which he had planned to do tomorrow, might be a little bit tricky. So Abdelhak, thank you for all the things you do for Global Chamber. Thanks for all the things you do just in general, all across China primarily. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you for the generous introduction. Yeah, I'm zooming in from Casablanca, Morocco, and then normally I live and do business in Shanghai. So jumping right into it, I will talk about three main industries that will be potentially big industries for foreign investment in the coming few years, especially in 2020. One of them in the financial industry. If you could please go to the first slide. So financial industry in China today is 45 trillion US dollars. And since 2017, officials in Beijing announced that China would be letting foreign companies, foreign banks expand in the Chinese markets. So back then, before 2020, every financial institution, every foreign firm which wanted to do local securities business had to get into joint venture with a Chinese partner. Caesar, if you could please put up the first slide right after this one. There you go. So the biggest opportunity in China is not only in investment banking, but mostly in asset management for all the savings that the middle class has been piling up for the last 20, 30 years. So the country has a lot of wealth, which makes asset management priority because those individuals still have very few investment options up until this year whenever the market opens. So foreigners will be able to apply for license to start wholly owned mutual fund management firms starting from April. So that's what Goldman Sachs is doing. They're working on that to start their operations in April, eventually buying out their local Chinese partner. Insurance also, foreign insurers can apply to set up 100% owned entities in China to offer life insurance. Life insurance today accounts for around 75% of the Chinese insurance market. Second opportunity is the food industry, because many subsidies were provided by food delivery giants like the Alibaba backed one, Ele.me and Meituan. They've been receiving a lot of subsidies to drive this takeout industry forward. The biggest change would be not how this food is delivered, but also in what it is delivered, because China is facing a lot of pressure on pollution, trash problem. So cities are coming up more strict regulations on the waste management. So in January 2020, the Chinese government announced that they have a new plan to crack down on plastic pollution across the country by 2025. So they're gonna ban single-use plastic straws, from now, they already started in major cities, like big laws and regulations start from big cities to see the change first and then drive it to the smaller towns and rural areas. For example, they're banning single-use plastic cutlery in big cities by the end of this year, and it's gonna get tighter and tighter. Then of course, plastic straws will be banned as well. Another industry that's growing is the snack industry. Snack industry is $444 billion, but there's growing concern for health and wellness among Chinese people. So Chinese consumers now check out the ingredients of what they're eating. They try to avoid snacks that are oily, that are fatty, that are rich in carb, in favor of more healthy options. And the latest report from McKinsey said that 72% of Chinese urbanites are actively pursuing healthier lifestyle. That means increasing the spending of their money on fresh products, on health supplements, on sports equipment, on gyms, and so forth and so on. Last but not least is tourism, because we know that's the industry that's massively hit now, because China has banned all the tours for outbound tours to provide any services for Chinese citizens to travel to China. 2018, the latest numbers say that 149 million trips were taken by Chinese citizens. That seems big, but you put in perspective, there are only less than 10% of the Chinese people who own passports. So whenever there will be 20%, 30%, 50% of the population that holds a passport, then we can see that number of 149 million outbound trips to double, triple, quadruple over the coming 5 to 10 years. The biggest opportunities are not in the package tours, they're more in the independent travelers world. Now we have all those young Chinese people who rely more on social networks, engagement. They check out their social media on the phone. They want to pay with mobile payments. They want to spend money on accommodation, on dining, on shopping. These are the three biggest categories on which Chinese tourists are spending over the last 2 or 3 years: accommodation, dining, and shopping. And this trend will keep on increasing. We have the government guiding the industry, issuing regulations on which destinations to go, which ones to avoid, how to behave when you go abroad. And we have, because of the new wave of Chinese tourism, the way that the new Chinese tourists buy and shop and travel, they're valuing more quality, looking for uniqueness. They try to go to places that are less crowded and avoid those tours and package tours. They're gonna still be there, but we should not ignore that big category of independent travelers, because they spent $130 billion in 2018. These young people, they're looking for skiing, they're looking for sailing, cruises, visiting museums, attending festivals, and so forth and so on. And they're highly engaged online. So your reputation as a tourist player or player in the tourism industry in your country will depend on how well you are perceived by the Chinese tourists on their social media. And I say social media, I'm not talking Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and YouTube, because these are all banned in China. I'm talking Weibo, I'm talking Little Red Book, I'm talking WeChat, of course, and its ecosystem. I'm talking just the basic Baidu search engine, for example. And that's it for me.
Fantastic. Just so that everybody knows, you're based in Shanghai, as you mentioned earlier. How long have you been in China, and why China for you?
I've been in China for over 6 years. Before that, I was in Dubai. I went from Dubai to China for a few months to study the language, and I ended up staying because opportunities were everywhere. And so I decided to stay and then further my studies and open my business. And I thought I'm going to stay for a year or two, and I end up staying for 6 years, maybe longer.
Fantastic. Congratulations. And you're probably
Thank you.
a little bit, maybe not nervous, but you're anxious to get back, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I already had to cancel a few meetings, few commitments with clients in the month of February. So for the whole month of February, for sure, I'm going to be staying out of China, and then just looking at the situation and then hoping it will get resolved so everybody can go back to business.
Fantastic. Well, hold on, and we'll move on to our next speaker, but I want everybody who's watching to be aware that there's a couple ways you can ask questions. You can go into the application and ask the question there, and we'll manage it that way and ask the speakers. And you can also send questions to info@globalchamber.org. So info@globalchamber.org with your questions, or in the app, and we'll have about 30 minutes at the end of our conversation to ask questions. And so the next distinguished speaker we have is Bill Edwards. He's the CEO and advisor to chief executives at Edwards Global Services. He is an executive with 46 years of international operations, development, executive, and entrepreneurial experience. He's lived in China, the Czech Republic, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Iran, Turkey, and he joins us today from Newport Beach, California. He has 37 years experience living and working in China. Bill, thank you for sharing your expertise today. Looking forward to hearing more.
Be part of this. I really appreciate the opportunity to share experience and learn more. And I've got a couple of slides that I'd like to go through. We can go to the second slide, Cesar, if you would. I first went to China in November of 1982. My original first career was as an oil exploration engineer, and I was seconded there by the American oil company that I worked for. And they put us in Zhanjiang, southwest China, which was a Chinese naval base, which was quite an experience. I left the oil industry and started going back to some of the countries I'd lived in, and became a master franchisee for a American quick print chain in China. Developed it across 6 cities, and subsequently have gone back to China many times, several times a year, taking U.S. brands, U.S. franchise brands into China. We established an office with the Greater China Managing Director based in Beijing in 2014. And I've had the opportunity to write a lot of articles and speak on doing business in China over the last 37 years. Go to the next slide, Cesar. We're really focused on taking consumer-based U.S. brands into China. We've taken them in the education, food and beverage, senior care, auto care, and fitness sector. The really interesting thing about this middle class, when I first went to China in 1982, the GDP per capita was very, very small, and today there's a huge middle class consumer base. A good example of that is the managing director we have based in Beijing, who has a Honda Odyssey minivan. He and his one child and his wife go skiing. They do an independent travel outside China every year, and they are truly middle class and very concerned about brands and quality, and especially quality for their child. We're finding that one of the challenges for American brands is keeping up with technology being developed in China. They're moving much faster than we are in consumer technology. And then as far as licensing and franchising U.S. brands into the country, the Chinese government is constantly updating and fine-tuning the needs for us to do various steps to be able to do business in China. And one of the things we've seen in the last couple of years especially is where it used to be U.S. brands were so much better than the indigenous brands, there are now a lot of local competitors. Next slide, please. If you look at some of the statistics, you'll see that the Chinese middle class is growing at a very rapid rate and probably is bigger than the total population of the United States. That's just a consumer base that no matter where you are in the world, you cannot ignore, because they have spending power and they are very careful where they spend their money, in our experience with the consumer-based brands that we have. As they get that income, they focus on quality, brand names, convenience, and customer service. And it's interesting that they're really good at shopping at brands that are franchised because they know what they're going to get. Just to give you some statistics, KFC, we believe, has somewhere over 6,000 units in China, and the Chinese actually think it's a Chinese brand. Pizza Hut, over 2,000 units. Starbucks, 3,500. McDonald's, 4,000. And so those are huge numbers, second only to the United States for these brands. Next page, please. One of the things that we're seeing is that you must do constant research and innovation to continue to be used by the consumers in China. Much faster and much more focused than here in the United States and in Europe. No cash payments. You know, the joke is that people visit China and try to use cash and credit cards, and nobody takes them. Online ordering and delivery is huge, and it's an immense percentage of the business. For restaurants here in the United States, it may be 10 to 15%. There, it's probably 30 to 50. Since, as was mentioned earlier, they don't have Google and Facebook, but they certainly have WeChat with over 800 million users, and on more than 80% of the cell phones in China. And WeChat is the most incredible application. I use it. Our entire team around the world uses it for just about everything you can think of. Next page. So that's my presentation, and it's really focused on consumer-based brands going into China. We've always had a good opportunity to go there with foreign brands, and now we have a lot more competition, but the spending power continues to grow at almost an exponential rate. Thanks, Doug.
That's great, Bill. Thank you very much. And thank you for connecting to me this week in WeChat. I feel now that I've made it in China because I'm connected to Bill in WeChat. One thing that I thought it was interesting that around physical fitness, some of the thing that you mentioned, Bill, around franchising side, have you been seeing some of the things that Abdelhak mentioned about the drive toward healthy foods, fitness in the market?
Absolutely. It's really interesting that some of the U.S. restaurant brands have more FitFare items on their menu in China than they do in the United States. And one of the reasons is that young middle-class family with their one child is extraordinarily careful what that child eats. And so they want to know exactly what it is that they're eating. And then fitness brands are increasingly going in. Anytime fitness is big, we're working on Snap Fitness going into all over China. And the Chinese, especially the millennials, are really into fitness. There's no doubt about it. It's, I think they're more concerned about obesity than we are.
Okay, sounds good. No Buddha bellies are allowed, apparently.
Well, there's obesity in China, because when I first went there at the end of '82, not too many people have much food. Today they have an awful lot of food, so they have to be very careful.
Got it. Interesting how it's evolved. So thank you for sharing. Keep the questions coming in. We really appreciate that, and you guys are doing a great job in giving us some background. Our last speaker, third and last, is Todd Cornell. He's the CEO of Culture 668. Todd is the founder of that firm. It's a consulting firm that helps U.S. businesses maneuver China with strategies that connect. And I've seen Todd firsthand in action and watching him between U.S. and Chinese business people, and it's an extraordinary thing to see. I'm in wonder at the magic that he creates. He's lived in 5 states and 3 Chinese regions, mainland China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, and he's traveled to over 30 countries. Todd, thank you so much. In addition to that, by the way, he's also the executive director for Global Chamber Northern Colorado. So thanks for that as well.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for your illustrious introduction. So 2 really great presentations, a lot of really good information. And I'm going to come at it a little bit different. I'm coming at it from a perspective of culture. And Bill's just previous talking about the word obesity with China just seems so strange, because in Chinese culture, traditionally, being overweight actually is looked at as being as showing that you're rich. And so parents used to actually want their children to be, I don't know if they wanted them to be obese, but they wanted them to be plump. And it showed that they did have food and money, which kind of goes back to back in the 80s. Yeah, the people were really thin back then. So my perspective is coming in from how to be successful with China from a cultural perspective, because China is a 5,000-year-old culture. And today, even in the education system, the young people are still learning the concepts of Confucius, the values of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And it's also very much a part of the language. It's a very yin-yang culture. So there have to be the two pieces in order to create a balance. And it's very, very prevalent in the language. It's very prevalent in the culture. So for being successful in China, my experience, and I happen to be fluent in Mandarin and reading and writing, my experience is that the language and the culture are very important, and it's a relationship-based experience. When we're working with the Chinese, maybe not so much in the financial industries because so much of that is data-driven, but when we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about going in and doing deals, and we're talking about negotiations and things like this, it's very important to be aware of the cultural situations. So relationships in China are basically what I see as being the foundation of success. One thing is that we as Westerners tend to depend on a legal document for creating a relationship sometimes. And in China, that can be a little bit, it might push us in the wrong direction, because relationship is not governed by a document. And so the legalities of China, it used to be in China that everything was done by a relationship, and still the Chinese themselves are very relationship oriented. Sometimes when we go in and we have too strong of a push with the agreement and following the agreement and everything, that can create some challenges. So I suggest that people slow down, they take things easy, they don't push too hard. Sometimes it's good to just pull back a little bit and give some breathing room, a little bit of buffer zone, if you will. Don't take everything at a face value. Sometimes what you hear and what you think you're perceiving, what you think you're understanding may not necessarily be what you are perceiving in your own mind, because of the culture differences, because of the different approaches to life, the different approaches to business. So things don't always seem to be what they are. Another thing is that trust is very different in the Chinese culture. Trust is a relationship-based situation. And that kind of goes back to an agreement. If the agreement is, we have an IP challenge between the US and China, I know for sure. And IP is something that we see as very important. And then it goes to China, and maybe there's some sort of an agreement about the IP, and then there's something that happens that could actually create some challenges. Sometimes it's good to just take things a little bit slower. And if there is a challenge, work through a relationship on it. Don't go to a lawyer and go legally, because when you do that, you're actually severing the relationship, you're severing the trust. So the trust is built through that relationship, and be sure that you have people in place who are able to navigate those discussions, those negotiations, and be able to save face for both sides of the table. Have a strategy. I think strategy is one of the most important things with success in China. And a strategy to us as Westerners, and I'm speaking from an American perspective because I work with American businesses who go into China, strategy isn't something that we always think about when we're going into China. And so I have put together 5 Chinese expressions that I think really fit well with some of the aspects of how the Chinese actually maneuver their own business. And so one is going to be coming from the Art of War. It's zhi ji zhi bi, which is no self, no others. So you need to actually understand your own practices, your own culture, your own personality and characteristics, and then be able to understand their culture, their ways of interacting, their ways of communicating. It really helps when you have people who can help guide you through those situations. So learn and get some good qualified support. The next one is Ru Xiang Sui Su, which means follow the village. Essentially, that's, I think, when we're in China, we're dealing with the Chinese, we need to respect their ways, we need to respect their culture. And sometimes that can be difficult because we may not understand it, or we may feel that our way is better. And I think that it's best if we can show respect for them and work with their culture, because there is a lot of wisdom there. The third one is 害人之心不可有，防人之心不可无, which is have a heart that protects and not a heart that harms. This is an expression that the Chinese don't talk about very often, but it's something that all Chinese know, and it's a part of their upbringing, is that you don't just trust anybody, but you also don't want to do anything that hurts anyone. So consequently, everybody knows that you have to be careful. And so I think it's important to be vigilant. The next one is 忍一时, which is to be restrained in the moment. So strategize your dialogue, take time, slow down, make sure that you're understanding things the way it's actually being expressed. And then the fifth one is 失败乃成功之母, which means failure is the mother of success. So your ways aren't the gold standard, and always be open to other options and other possibilities. And the first time may not be a success, but that doesn't mean that the second time can't be better. So communication styles, basically I would say slow down, use clear concepts, be sensitive to potential opportunities of misunderstanding. It's very easy to have misunderstandings between US and Chinese partners, or just within conversations. If your interpreter isn't able to interpret correctly what's going on, then it's going to create some challenges, because a lot of times things don't really interpret correctly because so much is culture based, especially coming from Chinese language and culture. So you need to have people who understand the Chinese culture very well, but also I would suggest coming from your own cultural background. If they have that experience, they have that expertise in being able to bridge those two cultures, then that's going to be a person that's going to help you be more successful. So using talent from your own cultural linguistic background, I think, is important. And then communicate your message in basic elements. Don't try and say everything quickly all at once. And sometimes you might just want to hold back on what you're wanting to talk about and maybe bring it up at another situation or in another discussion. So that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Great words of wisdom. I wrote down those 5, only in English though, so I'll go back with you on the Chinese version of each of those, but a lot of insights involved with those 5. Before we get into the questions, I do want to mention something that Todd has been part of. He and I had a delegation from the Canton Fair, hosted them in the United States. Actually, in Los Angeles, we met, and Todd was the interpreter, translator, go-between in all things, and it was a very successful conversation. The Canton Fair, as you may know, is the largest business fair in the world. It happens in Guangzhou. It's the 127th is coming up in April, May, and then it continues in October. We're doing an event because of Todd's great work. We're doing an event in Colorado, either March 9th or 10th, to talk about the Canton Fair. So I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that and stay in touch with Global Chamber. We'll be announcing that in our newsletter on Monday or Tuesday, which day it is, and you'll be able to zoom in. One of the things that really struck me about the Canton Fair, having not been there, but Todd has been there, is when we took the delegation, to the Los Angeles Convention Center. And it's a big place, as you might expect, a big city, Los Angeles. Their convention center is lots and lots of space, building after building. And the visitors were doing a calculation, and they told us during the trip that the Canton Fair is actually 9 times larger than the LA Convention Center. So the magnitude of scale of the Canton Fair, of China, of the opportunities are beyond our comprehension. Things that were mentioned already about the middle class in China being the size of the population of the United States. It's happening right now. And so these opportunities are right before us. And so the first question I'd like to pose to the 3 of you is, from your experience, what are some of the successes that you're seeing, maybe companies that you're admiring doing a really good job in China that we should maybe be looking to in terms of a best case scenario and somebody as a best practice that we should follow? Anybody's in your mind in terms of that fall into that category?
I'm
Bill
gonna
Edwards
just
here. I would say that one of the greatest examples worldwide of adaptation of an international brand going into a country is Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC. I'm convinced that the Chinese actually believe that's a Chinese brand and not an American brand. And they actually, sometimes you'll see these little kernels in some places that kind of look Chinese. What they have done is they have adapted their menu. They've adapted the way to deal with the customer. They have the most incredible customer interface anywhere in the world. And frankly, the chicken tastes better there than it does in the United States. And they're now over 6,000 units across the country. And they've gone from being only in first tier cities down into almost fourth tier, and maybe actually in fourth tier. And so it's just an incredible example of how to adapt while maintaining a brand and being successful based on what the people in the country want.
Amazing. So they must have installed management, local management, to be able to do that.
Oh, they did that very early on. KFC's been in the country for well over 20 years. And they did the KFC is known for adapting early with local management. But it was the menu development, and then as the millennials have come on in the middle class, adapting to the technology that's needed and to the interface with the customer on a world-class basis. Frankly, much more so than any other country.
Spectacular. Todd, I think you were going to say something.
Right. I was actually going to say Kentucky Fried Chicken. I was there. It's very impressive. I was there when they opened their first restaurant in China, which was in
Wow.
Beijing and Tianmen. I'm sure, Bill, you've probably been there. And
Yep.
yeah, but it was very impressive to watch the transition, because they and this is something I think is so important about the marketing aspect is considering the culture. They adapted to the culture. They obviously learned about the culture, and they were able to change themselves and their own messaging and their own presentation in ways that the Chinese were able to relate to. And I think that's something that's very important going into China, is that you want to find something that they relate to, and it might even be an expression out of a Chinese classic that was written 2,000 years ago that in some way connects their psyche and the core of their being and their culture with your product or your service. And I think that's what Kentucky Fried Chicken was able to do.
But they did that, Todd, while they maintained the integrity of the brand.
Right.
And that's
definitely
an amazing case study.
Staying with KFC, I don't know if you're aware, but the first KFC that opened in Beijing that you mentioned, one of their shareholder partners was the Chinese Ministry of Tourism. And interesting enough, the day it opened, the hundreds of people were lining up to discover what is this brand, the first American brand that's coming to China. They're doing a good job. Starbucks is doing an excellent job in China.
Yes.
I think it's a success story. In Shanghai, where I live, there's some shopping malls where you can find 3 or 4 locations of Starbucks in one same shopping mall. I mean, they adjusted the taste. They kept the integrity of their food, yet they adjusted the sweetness of some of their product to meet the palates of the Chinese consumers. They started something they never wanted to do, which was home delivery. And they started doing it last year whenever they had this big competitor called Luckin. So right there and then, Starbucks adapted, signed the big deal with Alibaba, and started doing home delivery and takeout food, coffees for the Chinese market. Their digital strategy is amazing. I can buy coupons of Starbucks on online platforms like Taobao, or I can go to their app and then have their discounts for Chinese mooncake whenever is the festival in China. So I think it's also Starbucks is an interesting case study that American brands and foreign brands should look into when they're exploring Chinese positioning.
And they can charge the same price they do here in Southern California.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Amazing. It is amazing. I presume that they've gotten into the health kick too, right? For both of those brands, Starbucks and KFC. Do they have healthy chicken meals, or I mean,
KFC does. I'm not sure about Starbucks because of the sugar, but KFC definitely does. Yes.
okay, gotcha. So that was great enlightenment. Really appreciate that. On the flip side of that, what have you seen where there have been maybe some dramatic failures that touch on some of the things that you talked about, where people didn't do their homework, they didn't tap into what Todd talked about of, you know, something that the Chinese could wrap their brain around and feel toward. Have you seen some things that have not worked out quite as well as those two success stories?
Coca-Cola was the first one.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay.
They
Super.
chose a word, a name that was offensive, and so they had to go back and choose a new name. So using the correct Chinese characters, using the correct meaning, making sure that you understand the meaning of the characters or any other possible insinuations or words or usages in even classical literature that might give on other meanings. Yeah.
So what's involved with that? Like anybody who has a name coming into China, what do you need to do to really vet a name? Coca-Cola, you would think they would have spent quite a bit of time on that. It sounds like not.
I don't think they did. I mean, that was a long time ago. I'm sure even Bill knows about that. I'm sure a lot of
Yeah.
people know about it because I think it was written up about, it was part of sort of people involved with China back then, I think, just knew about it. But they later changed it to Coca-Cola, which is perfect because it sounds like Coca-Cola and it means it's easy to drink and it makes you happy, sort of. So it's those are the sorts of things that need to be considered. The Chinese language is so different in the way it expresses things. It's in its own right, it's poetic. It's there are ways of putting characters together that grammatically may not be correct, but it actually creates a sense or a meaning that is powerful and can connect to the product and the consumer.
What we've done is when we bring a U.S. brand in, is we have a focus group and come up with about 4 or 5 different options and test it on the focus group to see how it sounds and what it means, because you can really make mistakes.
Got it. Any other recent failures that you guys have seen? I think there was something in the fashion industry, wasn't there, recently, where they just made a complete blunder in their marketing?
Yeah, faux pas. I mean, brand management. We saw it in finance, in fashion industry. We saw it lately with the NBA and the Houston Rockets scandal. It's just the way you manage your relationship with China and being sensitive to some of the issues that come up every once and then, and be able to navigate them without hurting anyone's feelings, without getting too political, although everything in China is politics. So at NBA, other ones that got in trouble, but for reasons that are outside of their control, is Uber, for example. Uber got into China before car sharing started in China, and then we had Didi, the biggest one today in China, is a copy of Uber. It came after Uber. So Uber is I think there are going to be some study cases in universities studying on how Uber went into the Chinese market and failed to keep up with Didi. And I mean, competing with the Chinese companies which don't have the two main things, which is whenever there's a problem in a large Chinese company, you inject more money and you hire more people, and the problem is solved all of a sudden. And that's what happened for Didi whenever they were fighting against Uber. Uber just disappeared from China, and then they left, although they sank a lot of money. I remember back then when Uber came into the market in China, we used to take free rides on Uber. For 10-15 minutes, for example, is going to cost you 20 RMB, and then you get a voucher that's going to give you that 20 RMB back. But they were not able to keep up with Didi.
Wow, and that's then been a platform for Didi to expand into other countries as well. So it was a multiple level failure, right? They not only lost China, but now they've given Didi a launch into other countries.
Yeah, so what Didi did, it just bought out Uber and then gave Uber a stake in Didi, a smaller stake. And that goes back to the opening up and reform in China back there in the time. Whenever they started letting in the first foreign companies, the Chinese politicians, political parties said, if you cannot beat a foreign brand in a Chinese market, you cannot beat it anywhere else in the world. And that's what the rationale behind opening up the market to those brands and seeing how good the Chinese people and Chinese businesses and Chinese companies and startups and capital can fight against them. And that's what happening with the Alibaba and Tencent and Huawei and Haier and so forth and so on.
I want to go back. This is a question, and I'm going to kind of take the question and turn it a little bit. Going back to the biography for Todd, I honestly hadn't seen it until I read it, where you talked about 3 Chinese regions and you included Taiwan as one of those. And my first reaction to that was, oh, wow, okay, that's, so how do you, given, the Chinese market and the kind of all of the things going on with Taiwan, how do you balance that? How do you articulate that when you're in China, or do you just stay away from it? Is it the third rail there? How do you guys handle it?
No, it's a region, because that's the way it's referred to in Chinese. They refer to them as regions. The way that I interact with them is culturally and linguistically. And there's really no barrier when there's interaction between mainland China and Taiwan culturally, because they are based in the same culture and history, and Hong Kong too. They just have different aspects of their histories that have influenced their positioning to be a little bit different. But just within those three regions, you have families who live in all 3 regions or in 2 of the regions. In 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek left mainland China and went to Taiwan, that divided families. And it was years until those families were able to be reunited. When I was living in Taiwan in the beginning, I remember I went to Beijing and I brought back some calligraphy. They wouldn't let me bring it into the country or into Taiwan because it was simplified characters. One time I was flying to Taiwan and there was a China Eastern flight. There was a plane there the first time. That it was just soon after they started having flights between mainland China and Taiwan. And I thought that they had landed in the wrong airport. I was sort of shocked that, wait, where are we? Are we in China or are we in Taiwan? So all of those things have taken years to sort of work through, and they're still working through it. But the thing is that there's a strong bond of culture between all 3 of those regions, including Macau.
Okay, so you clearly don't get into the politics of who China or who Taiwan belongs to. The cultural part of it brings it all together, doesn't it?
The one thing that I like to bring out is the license plates in Taiwan say Taiwanshan, which means the province of Taiwan. So that I think that that's their business. It's not necessarily mine. I don't want to get involved. I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with taxi drivers in Taiwan about mainland China, and that's fine. But at the same time, it all comes down to it is in so many ways one family. So it's a family situation.
Very, very insightful. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. In terms of companies that are thinking about the Chinese market and there may not be there yet, what are some of the things that they should be considering right now? And certainly the coronavirus is maybe very short term. I presume it's a short term thing. So if you're starting out 2020 saying, China as a bullet point in my business plan, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about in terms of next steps?
Well, Bill Edwards, I'll say to that, as I said, we're consumer-faced brands, and you must do local consumer marketing research. You cannot presume that the Chinese consumer is like any other consumer in the world. Even if you've got a lot of experience, you've got to go in and figure out what that consumer is going to do with your brand and how you're going to be able to attract that consumer, because they have a lot of options these days. And if you don't do that research up front, don't waste your time going there.
Our talk is related to the virus. No one knows how long it's gonna take, a few weeks, maybe a few months, but that supply chain would definitely be disrupted. First, you have the Chinese New Year holidays that were expanded They were extended, sorry, by the central government. They said, everybody, you're going to take 1 week extra. In some location is 2 weeks extra. That means people living, and some cities are already in lockdown, especially Wuhan and around Wuhan. So that means all those people who left the big cities to go to their villages are not sure if they're going to be able to go back or not to avoid the spread of the virus. So disruptions in your supply chain is a big problem. Some land borders are already closed. Some airlines stopped serving the Chinese market, like British Airways. I was hearing the news just before coming in that Russia is closing its land borders. I need to check on that news. Not sure yet.
It's
just
true.
thought about it. It's true. Yeah. So there you go. Disruptions to your supply chain is going to be a big problem.
And I would just add to all of that, culture. It's the core of the Chinese people, and culture. Their culture is so much more important to them in so many ways, and so much more a part of who they are in so many ways than as an American, our culture is to us. It's very different. And so as American companies going into China, we really have to make adjustment to recognize the value and to learn to value and to learn the importance of respecting the culture and also understanding the culture, having people who help you to understand that culture, which kind of goes back to what Bill was talking about in that naming and in just understanding your market, understanding the consumers, their practices, their habits, and how to communicate to them.
There's a comment in the question field, and I'll mention this. So Ken Slayton, thank you for your comment about your company, GBG. They've been in partnership with Taiping Life for many years, based in Shanghai, and then now have over 20 staff members in Shanghai and millions in life and health business. We talked about insurance earlier, so thank you for that shout out. And if there are any questions that you have, please share those. The insurance market was one of those, and I presume fintech, insurance, banking are all part of what you talked about, Abdelhak. In terms of areas of focus, I presume, Abdelhak, when you listed those are areas that you're involved with, and they're also areas of tremendous change and upcoming opportunity. And so, in fintech and in insurance, what are some of the things that people should be thinking about? Should they be doing something like what Ken has suggested, where they set up something on the ground or put a partnership in place prior to coming into China? What's the advice you have relative to setting up wholly owned versus partnerships, and whether it's in insurance or in any other business as they take their next steps?
One of the industries you mentioned, which is very hot industries still in the financial field, is the fintech. Today, we're living the golden days of fintech and blockchain and artificial intelligence and anything, all the industries in the future, it happens in China. I mean, if you come to some governments, like in Shanghai, there is what district of Minhang. They want to have kind of Silicon Valley for Shanghai. There in Minhang. So if you just say the word fintech, you can easily line up investors, you can get tax subsidies, you can get government subsidies to build up a company there and hire people and develop your product. So if any fintech company in the world, this is the time to enter a Chinese market. It's going to be a lot easier to raise some funds in very good terms, build a team right there, and then cash in a couple of years from now.
Okay, very good. And it sounds like, Bill, franchising is big in China. Is that fair?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge, not only for international brands going in, but a lot of Chinese brands have now begun franchising. And if I could just say a couple of things about going into China. If you're transactional, don't go there. You need to go and build relationships, like Todd said. And just as a side, if you're going there for negotiation with the group, don't tell them when you're leaving, because they'll wait to negotiate the very most difficult things until the last moment when you're getting in the taxi to go to the airport.
I would also add to that, don't use their interpreters. You want to use your own interpreter. You want to have somebody working for you. your interpreter is going to work for you. If you're going over and you're sitting with the Chinese person that you want to work with and you're using their interpreter, then you're not going to be getting what you need to have somebody there working for you, and they need to understand the culture, the mindset, and how to negotiate. That's really important.
Conversely, when Chinese businesses come to Europe or Africa or to the US, they're bringing their own translators. So,
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty standard.
That's why they
Yes.
they don't
Right.
trust people outside of their own culture as easily, and sometimes they'll trust them easier. It depends.
They're bringing their own interpreter. I was talking to a friend of mine here in Casablanca last week. When Huawei came in, they bought the whole building. They have their own cooks, they have their own drivers, they have their own cars, they have their own interpreters. I mean, it's kind of, I wouldn't call it closed circle, but they feel more comfortable when they are around themselves and each other.
Okay, that makes sense. We only have a few more minutes to go, and there's several more questions on Africa, on the Belt and Road Initiative, and on the Olympics 2022. So in terms of some of the other additional opportunities that people should be looking out for, given what China is doing in Africa, I'm not sure there's much, and maybe Abdelhak, you'd want to comment on that. Are there things that African companies should be thinking about relative to the influx of capital and investment from China into Africa relative to China?
It's very hard for foreign companies to plug themselves on the Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Initiative, when it comes to Africa, is government to government. A lot of times the labor comes also from China because it's disciplined, it works hard, it knows how it does things. Now to get involved in some of those projects is a little bit hard to cash in substantial ways. You still find small sectors of industry that go around those Belt and Road infrastructure projects on which people can get on board, like the tourism, like the education, for example, like for providing raw materials, could be some basic consulting services, valuations, for example, tax advices, legal advices. But if you're looking into getting involved in large infrastructure projects as an infrastructure company in Africa, it's a lot harder.
Okay, because they're largely going to what? Either Chinese companies or China-backed companies?
Exactly. Most of it is state-owned companies, financed by China, built by China for the local populations.
Okay, so be aware of what's going in, what the infrastructure is, and then find ways to build things around that.
Yeah, you can,
around that.
correct. You can plug yourself on some of those projects if you are, I don't know, maybe in the tax field, taxation field, in some sort of service like legal services, catering to that type of incoming flow of Chinese people coming into your country. So these are the areas where I think people could look into in Africa.
Okay. Bill or Todd, are either of you involved with Belt and Road, and or do you have any advice for folks? Is it any different than what we've just described?
It's Bill, we have no involvement with that whatsoever.
Okay. So, Bill, the work that you do on the franchising side, is it, you've had a very diverse background, including, like we talked about, living in the Czech Republic and other places. Is your focus these days on China?
It's on Europe and on Southeast Asia, including China.
Okay, got it. And does that inclusion and that involvement in other countries help and assist with the back and forth in and out of China then?
Well, when I go to Asia, I tend to go to 3 or 4 countries, and of course, China's one of them.
Okay.
And I will mention that I said that we have an office in Beijing with a managing director whose business card says he's the managing director for Greater China.
Greater China, okay. Which
includes all the little pieces that Todd was mentioning.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense, and that's worked out for you.
It has, yes.
Does it have a satellite office and all those little pieces?
No.
Okay, not yet. Okay, very good.
It has a flight path.
Any other advice around some of these big infrastructure projects? You've been doing work mainly in China, so I'm not sure if there's been things that you've been doing with Chinese entities outside of China.
Nothing in that area for me. No.
Okay, got it. How about you, Todd?
Not a whole lot. Looking at doing some discussion, have some discussions going with some potential Chinese clients.
Okay. Does the Olympics 2022, I think it's a Winter Olympics, right? It must be.
Yes, it is.
Are there opportunities there, or is it a similar situation where the opportunities are potentially scooped up already by government entities?
I'd say yes.
Scooped up already. So it's really more of on a macro level, development of the country and connection to maybe consumer brands that you guys have been largely talking about.
And just guanxi within the country, the connections of the people who know people who know people who know people.
I gotcha. So glad you guys all know people. That's good. That makes sense. So as we just have a couple minutes left, I'd like to just go around the table, if you will, and what did we leave out? What are some of the things that each of you would like to leave people with relative to next steps? And before we do that, I just want to make sure that everybody knows you can get a hold of any of these three people through the directory of Global Chamber, or the fail-safe is info@globalchamber.org, and we'll make sure that you get connected. And so let us know, because these are three people that should be on your Rolodex if you're doing business in Asia and especially in China. Who would like to go first in terms of maybe a very short wrap up?
I will go first, Bill, and I will say that having been involved with this country for 37 years, what's happening today is short term. Do not make that part of your strategic planning. You should be looking to the future. I was there in November in 3 cities meeting with 25 candidates for licenses for 3 of our brands. And in those 25 meetings, the word trade issue came up twice. Investors are looking to the future. They're not looking 12 to 18 months out. They're looking years out in China, which is, I think, a very, very fine and very mature trend.
Okay, so when you say don't look at what's happening now, I presume, I first thought you were talking about coronavirus. But
I am. I'm talking about that. This is a short-term situation that we need to be aware of, but if you're planning to do business in China, be strategic and long-term, not short-term.
Okay, because the other aspect of that is the kind of the hubbub bit with the U.S.-China trade activity that I presume they're also largely thinking of as a long-term issue and maybe just a little speed bump at this point.
It didn't seem to be a big concern to the investor groups we met.
Okay, interesting. Very good. Todd or Abdelhak?
So I would say that what Bill just said is good wisdom. The Chinese are always looking at a long term, because to them short term, to us is still long term. Just remember that China is a culture that is traditionally continuous over thousands of years. And every day you can hear expressions in the language that are coming from things that people said 2,000-3,000 years ago. It's a long time, but still up to that. And that's still very much a part of who they are. What we see is a superficial view of China. It looks modern. It looks very, wow. But underneath all of that is still a very old and traditional culture. And that's really the core of who the people are. So always keep in mind that what you're seeing, what you're experiencing may not be how you're interpreting it from your own cultural perspective. I think that's how it's really easy to misunderstand or to create misunderstandings when we just move in from our own perspective, which is usually short term. I want it tomorrow. Things like that. It's always better to take things slower. But the Chinese, once you have a good relationship with them, I've always said that the Chinese are my best friends, but they're also my worst enemies. There's nothing in between. And when you have them on your side, they're going to do everything for you. When you don't have them on your side, it's going to be a difficult situation. And so you want to maintain positive, strong, and good relations. and move forward from that, because that's the foundation of success.
Abdelhak, how about you?
One last word before I go. Just whenever the virus situation clears, get on a plane and go visit China. It's impossible to run any sort of business sitting behind your desk in the other side of the world, even though very small business, very small transactional business, just get on a flight, go over there, spend a week, 2 weeks, whatever it takes, have a feel of the vibe on the ground. It might change your life like it did for myself.
Fantastic. And by the time everybody figures that out, you'll be back in Shanghai. You'll likely might see Todd and Bill there as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Great information. Global Chamber has 2 to 3 events a week like this. And we really appreciate the fact that we've got experts within our membership that are so knowledgeable, so helpful, so educational, and people that we can turn to. Todd, Bill, Abdelhak, have a great rest of your day. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks a
you.
lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.